Okay, so today we're taking a deep dive into some really fascinating ideas from Naval Ravikant.
Yeah, we're going to be exploring his thoughts on wealth and happiness and really trying to pull out those key insights that can be super valuable. Those little aha moments.
Exactly. And all of this is based on his book, The Almanack of Naval Ravikant, which, by the way, is an incredible compilation of his wisdom over, like, what, a decade?
Yeah, over a decade. It was actually put together by Tim Ferriss, and it's basically like having all of Naval's best ideas from Twitter, his blog, podcasts, all in one place.
Sort of like the cheat sheet to understanding Naval's philosophy on, well, life, really. But before we get too deep, for anyone who might not know, who is Naval Ravikant?
Right, so he's the founder and chairman of AngelList, which, for those not in the tech world, is a platform for startups and investors.
And he's really open about his own journey, going from, as he puts it, born poor and miserable to, well, pretty successful and happy.
Exactly, and he's really articulate about the steps he took, the principles he followed to make that happen.
And his story is super interesting, too. I mean, growing up in a single-parent household in New York City, not the easiest start.
No, not at all. And he talks a lot about how books were his real friends, spending tons of time in libraries, teaching himself things.
Yeah, real self-starter vibes from the beginning. And he
Mhm.
even had a job, like before he could even drive.
Oh, yeah, he worked for this, unofficial catering company.
Really?
Yeah, pretty resourceful. But one of the biggest turning points for him was getting into Stuyvesant High School. He was a totally unknown kid, as he says, and that really opened doors for him.
Yeah, that led to an Ivy League education and then, boom, into the tech world.
And the whole point of this deep dive is to explore the ideas that guided him, his principles for building wealth without relying on luck.
And, of course, how to actually be happy along the way, not just, successful on paper.
Absolutely. And he starts with this really interesting distinction between wealth, money, and status.
Okay, break that down for me, because I think a lot of people kind of lump those together.
Right. So for Naval, wealth is about having assets that generate income even when you're not actively working. Assets that earn while you sleep, is how he puts it.
Okay, so it's not about, like, the flashy stuff, the big house, the fancy car. That's more.
That's more status, where you rank in the social hierarchy. It's often a zero-sum game, meaning someone's gain is another person's loss.
And money.
Money is just a tool, like a mechanism for transferring wealth or time.
Okay, so how does someone actually build this kind of wealth, the kind that works for you, not the other way around?
Well, Naval's view is that getting rich is a skill, and it's a skill you can learn.
A skill. So it's not just about, like, working your butt off.
Not entirely. It's more about knowing what to work on, who to work with, and when to do it. It's about strategy, almost like a game.
So it's less about brute force and more about being smart about your efforts.
Exactly. And there's this important point he makes about ethical wealth creation. He believes it's absolutely possible. But he also says that if you secretly despise wealth, it's going to be hard to accumulate it.
Interesting. Almost like your mindset is holding you back.
Yeah, and he also talks about the importance of ignoring those people who play status games, the ones who try to tear down others who are creating wealth.
Oh, I know those types. They're always quick to criticize anyone doing well.
And that's why it's crucial to not get caught up in those games. Focus on your own path. And remember, you're not going to get rich by trading your time for money.
Meaning, like, just working a 9-to-5 job, even if it pays well.
Right. You need to own equity, have a piece of a business if you really want to reach financial freedom.
Okay, so building wealth is about owning assets, having a stake in something that grows, not just exchanging your hours for a paycheck.
Exactly. And to really build wealth, you need to figure out what society needs, what it wants, but doesn't know how to get yet, and provide that at scale.
So it's about solving problems, but not just any problems. Problems a lot of people have.
Right. And that leads to this idea of specific knowledge. It's the knowledge that you can't just get from a textbook or a course.
So it's not like, I don't know, learning a programming language or getting an MBA.
Not exactly. It's more about your unique skills, your interests, even your quirks.
Okay, give me some examples. What does specific knowledge look like in the real world?
Well, it could be anything from being a really good salesperson to having a natural talent for music.
So, like, if you were always that kid who could pick up any instrument and play it.
Exactly. Or maybe you're just naturally obsessed with certain topics. You love to dive deep into things that most people find boring.
I can definitely relate to that.
Or maybe you're a really good storyteller. You love to gossip. That could be a foundation for journalism.
So it's about finding those things that come naturally to you, those things you're drawn to almost effortlessly.
Exactly. And that's what makes you unique. No one can compete with you on being you, as Naval says.
So specific knowledge is about leaning into your individuality, not trying to be like everyone else.
Right. It's about escaping competition through authenticity. If you're just copying what others are doing, you're always going to be playing catch up.
And you're competing in a crowded market.
But when you build something that's truly authentic to you, you become irreplaceable. Think about someone like Joe Rogan, for example. His podcast is so successful because it's just him being him.
Yeah, you can't replicate that.
Exactly. Or Scott Adams with Dilbert. He created something unique that resonated with millions of people.
Okay, so specific knowledge is about finding that unique intersection of your skills, interests, and personality. But what about like foundational skills? Are those important too?
Oh, absolutely. Things like being able to communicate effectively, being able to persuade, to write well. Those are crucial.
So it's not enough to just be like the world's best expert on something super niche if you can't communicate it to anyone.
Exactly. You need those strong foundations.
Yeah.
But you also need that deep expertise in one or two areas that truly fascinate you.
Okay, I love that. Find your unique thing, master the basics, and get really good at communicating what you know.
Precisely. And this brings us to another key principle. Playing long-term games with long-term people.
Okay, I've heard Naval talk about this a lot. It's all about the power of compound interest, right?
Exactly. But it's not just about money. It applies to relationships, knowledge, basically everything.
So the idea is that consistent long-term effort in any area eventually leads to huge results.
Yeah. Like, think about a snowball rolling down a hill. It starts small, but as it picks up momentum, it gets bigger and bigger.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this apply to, say, relationships?
Well, think about it. If you consistently treat people with respect, if you're honest and trustworthy, those relationships will deepen and become more valuable over time.
It's like building a reputation, not just for skills, but for character.
Exactly. And that kind of reputation pays off in the long run. Naval talks about his relationship with Elad Gil, who's a really successful entrepreneur and investor. They've been friends for years. And that trust, that shared history, has made them incredibly valuable to each other.
So it's about finding people you can grow with over time, people who share your values and your vision.
Absolutely. And remember, intentions don't matter as much as actions. It's about consistently doing the right thing, even when it's hard.
And he also talks about how so much of the effort we put in is actually wasted.
Yeah, he says 99% of effort is wasted. The key is to find that 1% that really matters, the 1% that will lead to those compounding returns.
So it's not about being busy, it's about being effective.
Exactly. And this leads to the concept of accountability. Naval's advice is to embrace accountability and take risks under your own name.
So like putting your name on your work, your business, your ideas.
Yeah. He believes that society rewards those who are willing to stand behind their work, who are accountable for their actions.
And that taking ownership can actually lead to more opportunities, more responsibility, more leverage.
Right, and leverage is crucial. There are three kinds: labor, capital, and products with no marginal cost of replication.
Okay, let's break those down. Labor is basically managing people, right?
Yeah, but Naval considers that the messiest form of leverage in the modern world.
And capital is money, which obviously can be very powerful.
But the most interesting form of leverage right now is those products with no marginal cost of replication. Things like software, media, content.
Because once you create it, you can distribute it infinitely without any additional cost.
Exactly. And that's what makes them so powerful. And what's particularly exciting is that they're permissionless.
Meaning you don't need anyone's approval to create them.
Right. You don't need to ask for permission to write a book, start a podcast, build a website. And that's incredibly democratizing.
It levels the playing field. Anyone with the good idea and the drive to execute can potentially reach a huge audience.
Exactly. And Naval himself has talked about how sharing his ideas publicly, even though he was initially hesitant, ultimately benefited him tremendously.
So it's about taking that leap, putting yourself out there, and being willing to be judged.
But the good news is that in today's world, the downside risk is relatively limited.
Especially in places like Silicon Valley, where failure is often seen as a learning experience.
Right. People are more forgiving of honest mistakes, so it's a great time to take risks and build something you believe in.
And connecting this back to wealth creation, Naval is very clear that you need to own a piece of a business if you want to achieve financial freedom.
Because if you're just selling your time, you're inherently limited in how much you can earn.
Right, your income is directly tied to your hours. But when you own equity, you can potentially earn even when you're not working.
Exactly. And that brings us to the idea of finding a position of leverage. Naval emphasizes that we live in an age of infinite leverage, and the rewards for genuine intellectual curiosity have never been higher.
So it's about following your interest, diving deep into things you're passionate about, and finding ways to leverage those skills.
Right. And remember, those three forms of leverage: labor, capital, and those products with no marginal cost. Each has its advantages and disadvantages.
And Naval's advice is to optimize for independence rather than pay.
Yeah, find a role where you have control over your time, where you're judged on your results, not just your hours.
And he even breaks down what it takes to be successful in a great tech company. You need to be able to either sell or build.
And ideally, you can do both.
Because at the end of the day, you want to be earning with your mind, not just your time. He uses the example of real estate, right?
Yeah, the progression from laborer to contractor to developer, and ultimately to building platforms like Trulia or Zillow.
It's about moving up the value chain, finding ways to leverage your knowledge and skills to create something bigger than yourself.
And that leads to getting paid for your judgment.
Because when you have leverage, even slightly better judgment can lead to huge results.
Think about a CEO making a decision that affects thousands of employees. That's why being able to think long-term, like Warren Buffett, is so valuable.
So it's not just about working hard, it's about working smart.
Exactly. And in this age of leverage, being really good at something, even better, being the best in the world at something, is more important than ever.
But with so much opportunity out there, it can be overwhelming, right?
Oh, absolutely. Naval himself talks about having too many ways to make money and not enough time.
So how do you decide what to focus on?
Well, he advises to value your time at an hourly rate and ruthlessly spend to save time at that rate.
So like if something costs less than your hourly rate, but it will save you time, do it.
Exactly. And remember, you will never be worth more than you think you're worth.
Meaning if you undervalue yourself, you're going to undercharge, underperform, underachieve.
Right. And he also cautions against comparing your wealth to others. Envy is the enemy of both wealth and happiness.
Because there's always going to be someone richer, more successful, whatever.
Exactly. Focus on your own path, your own goals, and try to find those positive-sum games where everyone can win.
Like collaborations, partnerships, win-win scenarios.
Right? And to do that, you need to get good at saying no to everything else.
All the distractions, all the shiny objects, all the things that don't really matter.
Exactly. And surround yourself with people who are already successful, who are playing the long game, who share your values.
But don't just try to take from them. Find ways to help them, to contribute value.
Naval actually says to figure out what you're good at and start helping other people with it.
And he even tells this funny story about being sort of pushed into starting his first company.
Yeah, it wasn't this grand plan. It just kind of happened organically.
And over time, he says making money became less about necessity and more about the joy of solving problems.
Like a creative challenge.
And that's what he wants for everyone,
Huh.
to find that work that feels like play.
To be so passionate about what you're doing that it doesn't feel like work at all.
He uses the analogy of art. He says creating businesses is like creating art for him.
Because he enjoys the process, he's passionate about the product.
And that passion becomes a competitive advantage.
Because when you love what you do, you're willing to put in the extra effort, the extra hours, the extra thought.
And that makes all the difference.
Now, let's talk about luck.
Okay, because we've been talking about getting rich without getting lucky, but obviously luck plays some role.
It does, but Naval distinguishes between 4 types of luck. The first 3 are kind of random, but the 4th is what he calls luck that you build.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is luck that you build?
It's about building your character in a way that naturally attracts opportunities. He says your character becomes your destiny.
So it's about being the kind of person that people want to work with, want to help, want to see succeed.
Exactly. It's about building a reputation for honesty, integrity, and long-term thinking.
And that kind of reputation takes time to build.
It does, but it's worth it. Because in the long run, those long-term games, those positive-sum relationships, are what lead to real wealth and happiness.
And he's actually not a big fan of traditional networking.
No, he thinks it's often a waste of time. He says it's better to be a maker, to create something interesting, and let the right people find you.
So focus on building something valuable, not just schmoozing.
Exactly. And when you do interact with people, pay attention to their actions, not just their words.
He says to be wary of those who talk too much about their own honesty.
Because true integrity speaks for itself.
And he has a pretty high bar for who he lets into his inner circle.
He says, the closer you want to get to me, the better your values have to be.
So it's all about surrounding yourself with people who elevate you, who challenge you, who share your commitment to excellence.
Absolutely. And finally, when it comes to building wealth, patience is key.
Yeah, he talks about how a lot of the people he knew early in his career, the ones who were talented and driven, eventually became incredibly successful.
But it took time, often years, even decades.
So don't get discouraged if you don't see results immediately.
Just keep learning, keep building, keep improving, and eventually you will get what you deserve.
And remember, money is just a tool. It buys you freedom in the material world.
But it doesn't solve all your problems.
So get rich, but don't stop there.
Now, let's talk about judgment.
Okay, because that's something that's often overlooked, isn't it? People focus so much on hard work, on hustle, but judgment is what separates the truly successful from everyone else.
And Naval is very clear that there's no shortcut to smart. Judgment is a skill you have to develop over time.
So what exactly is judgment, in his view?
He defines it as wisdom applied to external problems.
So it's not just about being intelligent, it's about being able to apply that intelligence to real-world situations.
Right, and it's about understanding the long-term consequences of your actions, being able to see the bigger picture.
And he actually prefers the term clear thinker to smart.
Because the smartest people are able to explain complex ideas in a simple way.
And he emphasizes the importance of mastering the basics.
Yeah, he says we'd be better off nailing the basics than chasing after the latest, most complicated ideas.
Because those basic principles, those fundamental truths, are what really matter.
And when you're making decisions, it's crucial to be honest with yourself, to be willing to confront reality, even when it's uncomfortable.
To set aside your ego and your preconceived notions and see things as they truly are.
Exactly. And sometimes suffering can be a catalyst for truth.
Because it forces you to let go of your illusions.
And Naval is a big proponent of contrarian thinking.
Not just for the sake of being different, but for the sake of thinking for yourself.
Right. It's about reasoning from first principles, not blindly accepting what everyone else believes.
And he observes that optimistic contrarians are the rarest breed.
Because they're not afraid to challenge the status quo, but they also believe that things can get better.
Now, to develop clear thinking, Naval recommends shedding your identity.
Because our egos, our sense of self, can really distort our perception of reality.
We get attached to certain beliefs, certain ways of seeing the world, and that can prevent us from seeing things clearly.
So it's about unconditioning yourself, questioning your assumptions, being willing to change your mind.
And he talks a lot about collecting mental models.
Mental models are basically frameworks for understanding the world. They're like mental shortcuts that help you make better decisions.
So instead of reacting to every situation from scratch, you have these pre-existing models that you can apply.
Exactly. And he points to evolution, game theory, and the work of thinkers like Charlie Munger and Nassim Taleb as great sources for mental models.
So it's about learning from the best, understanding how they think, how they approach problems.
And some of the key mental models he highlights are evolution, inversion, complexity theory, and economics.
Evolution helps you understand how systems change over time.
Inversion is about focusing on what you want to avoid rather than what you want to achieve.
Complexity theory helps you understand that the world is complex and unpredictable, and that you can't always control the outcome.
And economics, particularly microeconomics and game theory, is essential for understanding how people make decisions, how markets work, how incentives shape behavior.
He also talks about the importance of compound interest in the realm of knowledge.
Yeah, the more you learn, the easier it becomes to learn even more.
And he emphasizes the importance of basic math skills, understanding rates of change through calculus, and the principle of falsifiability.
Falsifiability is about being able to test whether a claim is true or false.
And he has this great decision-making rule. If you can't decide, the answer is no.
Especially for big life decisions.
So if you're on the fence about something, it's probably a sign that you shouldn't do it.
And the best way to build your collection of mental models is through reading.
He's a huge advocate of reading widely across different disciplines.
Science, math, philosophy, history, literature.
And he has a really practical approach to reading.
Treat books like blog posts. Don't feel obligated to finish every book you start. Reread the good ones.
And focus on understanding the core idea.
And to really internalize what you're reading, try explaining it to someone else.
Yeah, that's a great way to test your understanding.
And focus on foundational knowledge. Stick to the basics, the core principles that have stood the test of time.
And read the originals, the classics. Don't just rely on summaries or interpretations.
And he has some interesting advice for navigating the information age.
Treat books as bite-sized content. Read multiple books at the same time.
And don't be afraid to revisit older texts.
Because the older the problem, the older the solution.
Now let's shift our focus to happiness.
Okay, because that's ultimately what we're all striving for.
It is. And Naval sees happiness in relation to wealth and health.
He says we tend to pursue them in that order: wealth, then health, then happiness. But their importance is actually reversed.
Happiness should be the foundation.
So how does he define happiness?
He says happiness is the state when nothing is missing.
So it's not about having everything you want. It's about being content with what you have.
Exactly. It's about finding inner peace, a sense of completeness.
And he also talks about the insignificance of the self.
Because when you realize that you're just a tiny speck in the vast universe, your problems start to seem a lot smaller.
And that can be incredibly liberating.
And he reminds us that our lives are incredibly brief.
A blink of a firefly in the night.
So we need to make the most of every moment.
And he encourages us to choose to interpret events in a positive light.
Because we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react.
He says, we are malleable. The world is largely fixed.
So focus on changing yourself, not the world.
And meditation can be a powerful tool for cultivating inner peace.
But he also acknowledges that it can be tough when you're going through difficult times.
Because true happiness isn't about avoiding pain. It's about learning to accept it.
And he emphasizes the importance of cultivating indifference.
Not apathy, but detachment from things you can't control.
Because when you let go of the need to control everything, you find a lot more peace.
And he's very clear that happiness is a choice, a skill you can develop.
Your mind is like a muscle that you can train.
And he talks about the importance of living in the present moment.
Letting go of the past, not worrying about the future, just being here now.
He says, enlightenment is the space between your thoughts.
And true happiness requires peace, not just fleeting joy.
And he warns against the illusion of, I'll be happy when.
Because that's a recipe for perpetual unhappiness.
You'll always be chasing after something, always be waiting for something to happen.
And he says envy is the enemy of happiness.
Because it's a pointless emotion. It doesn't get you anywhere.
He asks, would you trade lives with someone you envy, including all their problems?
If the answer is no, then there's no point in being envious.
And happiness is built through habits.
Small, consistent actions that compound over time.
Like minimizing alcohol, sugar, social media, caffeine.
And prioritizing exercise, getting enough sleep, spending time in nature.
And cultivating a positive mindset.
Catching yourself when you're being negative and choosing to focus on the good.
And he even suggests telling your friends that you're happy to reinforce the belief.
And embracing the futility of it all.
Recognizing that in the grand scheme of things, our lives are incredibly short and insignificant.
But that can actually be liberating.
Because it allows you to view life as a game, to enjoy the ride.
And ultimately, happiness is your own responsibility.
No one else can make you happy.
You have to choose it.
And part of choosing happiness is choosing to be yourself.
Not who your parents want you to be, not who society tells you to be, but who you truly are.
And Naval believes that no one can beat you at being you.
So embrace your uniqueness, your quirks, your passions.
Because those are your superpowers.
And those are what will lead you to make your unique contribution to the world.
And physical well-being is a crucial foundation for happiness.
So take care of your body.
Eat healthy foods, exercise regularly, get enough sleep.
And pay attention to your senses.
What do you see, hear, smell, taste, touch?
And meditation can help you quiet your mind, reduce stress, and connect with your inner self.
And Naval's preferred form of meditation is called choiceless awareness.
Which is about observing your thoughts without judgment.
Just noticing them come and go without getting caught up in them.
And when you can do that, you start to realize that you are more than your mind.
There's a deeper awareness, a deeper consciousness that's always present.
And meditation is essentially about turning off the noise of society and listening to yourself.
Tuning in to your inner wisdom.
And Naval encourages us to be open to change.
To have an internal revolution.
To be willing to let go of old beliefs, old habits, old ways of being.
And to make commitments.
Because commitments can be a powerful driver of action.
And he advises us to be impatient with actions, but patient with results.
So take action now, but don't expect results overnight.
And choose to grow yourself.
Create systems for success.
Focus on becoming the best version of yourself.
And he emphasizes the importance of lifelong learning.
especially in the areas of mathematics and persuasion.
And his values have shifted over time from freedom to freedom from.
From the freedom to do what he wants to the freedom from negative emotions and reactions.
And he defines courage as not caring what other people think.
And he constantly reminds us that time is our most valuable asset.
So don't waste it.
And he talks about the importance of freedom from uncontrolled thinking.
Recognizing that the monkey mind, that constant chatter in our heads, is a tool we can use, not a master we have to obey.
And self-awareness is a lifelong process.
It's about constantly observing your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors, and making adjustments as needed.
And Naval sees the modern struggle as a battle between our individual willpower and the constant distractions that are engineered to keep us hooked.
Social media, advertising, the news cycle, it's all designed to capture our attention and keep us consuming.
And he observes that real truths are often initially perceived as heresies.
Because they challenge the status quo, they disrupt our comfortable beliefs.
And he even contemplates the meaning of life.
Asking questions like, what is the universe doing? And what is our role in it?
And his own philosophy is rooted in honesty, long-term thinking, and aligning your values with the people you spend time with.
He describes his approach as rational Buddhism.
Seeking to reconcile the insights of science with the wisdom of Buddhism.
And he defines wisdom as understanding the long-term consequences of your actions.
So it's not just about being intelligent, it's about being able to see the bigger picture, to understand the ripple effects of your choices.
And he reminds us that the present moment is all we really have.
That we're dying and being reborn at every moment.
And he finds beauty in impermanence.
And the fact that everything is constantly changing, evolving, transforming.
And he reminds us that inspiration is perishable.
Act on it now, don't wait.
And he recommends a bunch of books that have influenced his thinking.
Nonfiction books on science, philosophy, history, psychology.
And science fiction books that explore the future, the limits of human potential, the nature of reality.
And he's a big believer in rereading the good ones.
Because you always find new insights, new connections, new perspectives.
And finally, there are his Life Formulas I and Naval's Rules, which are concise summaries of his core principles.
So if you want a cheat sheet to Naval's wisdom, check those out.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways?
Well, I think it all comes down to this. Build wealth ethically, leverage your unique skills, play the long game, embrace accountability, cultivate good judgment, and choose happiness.
And remember, this deep dive was designed for you, our listener.
We wanted to give you a comprehensive understanding of Naval's ideas without overwhelming you with information.
And hopefully we've sparked some of those aha moments that will help you on your own journey.
So as a final thought, consider this. Naval says, wisdom is the discarding of vices and the return to virtue by way of knowledge.
What vices are holding you back? What virtues do you need to cultivate?
We encourage you to explore the resources we've mentioned and continue your own deep dive into these ideas.
Because the journey to wealth and happiness is a lifelong pursuit.
And it's a journey worth taking.